In a quiet corner of Texas where sunlight paints the fields gold, a golden retriever named Buddy chased after a ball, his tail wagging with joy. For him, the world was simple love, family, and morning runs. But that morning, everything changed. Stolen under the cover of darkness, Buddy vanished without a trace, the warmth of home replaced by cold metal cages, distant barks, and fluorescent lights. Deep underground, where kindness has no name, Buddy would face something far beyond fear. He wasn't alone. A pair of eyes met his hardened, cautious. Max, a German shepherd, long trained and long forgotten, watched the new arrival. A friendship was about to form. A war was about to begin. But maybe, just maybe, a new chapter too. Chapter 1. Golden Warrior. It was the kind of morning that made Texas proud. In the outskirts of Wimberley, a quaint hill country town, the sun spilled across the amber fields like honey, bathing everything in a warm glow. The sky stretched wide and blue with only a few wispy clouds grazing the horizon. The air smelled of dew and mesquite trees, and the only sound was the gentle creak of a wooden fence and the occasional call of a mockingbird. A golden retriever named Buddy raced along a grassy path behind a small farmhouse. He was 3 years old with a sleek honey-colored coat that shimmered in the morning light. His ears flopped happily with every stride, his eyes bright and trusting, and his tail whipped side to side in wild arcs. Buddy had always been a gentle soul. He loved belly rubs, peanut butter treats, and chasing tennis balls thrown by the children who adored him. The farm belonged to the Millers, a young family who had moved from Austin a few years ago seeking a simpler life. Emily Miller, 34, was a nurse who worked part-time at the local clinic. She was tall with curly brown hair, usually tied in a bun, and her face carried the softness of someone who listened more than she spoke. Her husband, Tom, 36, was an electrician, sun-tanned and solidly built, always wearing a worn Astros cap. They had 2 kids. Lily, 8, and Noah, 5, both loved Buddy as if he were their sibling. That morning, Lily tossed a bright green ball across the yard. Buddy bolted after it, his paws pounding the earth. The ball bounced into the edge of the woods that lined the property. Buddy skidded to a halt near the underbrush, sniffed the ball, then froze. There was movement behind the trees, a low hum, a mechanical click. Before Buddy could bark, a net flew from the darkness, wrapping around him in an instant. He yelped, struggling, but the net cinched tight. 2 masked figures stepped from the shadows, dressed in dark tactical gear, speaking into radios. One of them pressed a syringe into Buddy's flank. Within seconds, his body went limp. In the distance, Lily's voice called out Buddy. But the only reply was the sound of leaves rustling as the men vanished into the forest. Buddy cradled between them. Hundreds of miles away in a remote desert region of New Mexico, the landscape was dust and stone, scarred by heat and secrecy. Nestled among hills barely visible from above was Facility Delta, a former missile silo repurposed into a private research site. Gray concrete buildings sat flat and cold beneath a sky bleached white by sun. Inside, Buddy awoke in a metal cage. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was sterile thick with the scent of antiseptic and fear. Dogs barked in the distance, dozens of them. He tried to stand, legs wobbling. The cold floor shocked his paws. His heart pounded. From across the corridor, another dog watched him. This one was a German shepherd, older with alert amber eyes and a black and tan coat marred by scars. Max was 4 years old and had served 2 tours with the U.S. Army before being reassigned here after a breakdown during a mission. Max had once been a top-tier canine operative, intelligent, precise, fiercely loyal. But the things he'd seen overseas had left cracks in his mind. After his handler was killed by an IED, Max had refused to obey further commands. He had been classified as unstable and quietly removed from service. In the facility, Max had become something of a ghost, watching, calculating, but rarely reacting. Yet, when he saw Buddy, something flickered behind his eyes. The golden retriever looked confused, terrified, innocent. Max felt an old stirring in his chest, the urge to protect. Over the following hours, scientists in white coats came and went. They spoke in clipped tones, recording observations. Buddy was scanned, examined, and subjected to tests. Needles, electrodes, commands he didn't understand. He whimpered, but never fought. Dr. Henry Clark, the facility's lead scientist, was a man in his early 50s, lean and methodical. His silver hair was neatly parted, and his glasses reflected the blue light of his tablet screen. Clark had once been a veterinarian, but left the field after a series of losses in his family pushed him toward more emotionless endeavors. He now saw animals not as companions, but as instruments of possibility. "This one's malleable," he muttered, noting Buddy's compliant nature. "We'll start cognitive modulation tomorrow." That night, Buddy lay curled in his cage, eyes wide open, chest rising and falling quickly. Max shifted in his own pen, rose and padded closer to the edge. He let out a soft, low whine almost like a lullaby. Buddy looked up. Their eyes met again. This time, Buddy didn't flinch. Outside, the desert wind howled across the barren hills. Inside, 2 souls began to tether to each other. Chapter 2. Training and the Bond that Formed. The facility operated on a rhythm that didn't match the world above. Time was regimented, measured in beeps and buzzes in the flicker of red lights and the sterile announcements over the PA system. Buddy had begun to lose sense of day and night. There were no windows, only artificial light, and the sharp scent of disinfectant clung to everything. Each morning, if it could be called that, started with the loud hiss of hydraulic doors. A uniformed handler named Carter strode down the hallway. Carter was a former Marine in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and built like a brick wall. His face was pockmarked from old acne, and he kept his dark hair buzzed close. Efficient and silent, he rarely spoke to the dogs, seeing them purely as tools. He didn't abuse them, but there was no warmth in his approach either. Max had learned to anticipate Carter's steps. Today, he watched silently as Carter approached Buddy's cage. The golden retriever hesitated at the back ears low. Max let out a low whine, but Carter ignored it and opened the cage. Buddy was fitted with a slim collar, metal and wire. A light blinked on its side as Carter led him into a large training chamber. Inside, cameras hummed quietly behind mirrored glass. On the far side stood a new figure, Dr. Lucia Feldman, the behavioral specialist recently added to the project. Feldman was in her early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and almond-colored eyes that missed nothing. She wore her chestnut hair in a loose braid, a contrast to the clinical environment around her. Her presence brought a subtle tension to the room. Unlike Dr. Clark, she had once worked with trauma patients, both human and animal, and still believed at least in part in the capacity for healing. But she had debts, and Facility Delta paid well. Buddy was commanded to sit. When he didn't respond immediately, a mild pulse emitted from the collar. He yelped tail between his legs and sat. Feldman winced but made no move to intervene. Instead, she jotted notes. High compliance rate under stimulus. Low aggression. Possible candidate for dual-mode tasks. Max, observing through the small grate in his cage, growled quietly. Training continued for hours. Buddy was made to retrieve objects, navigate obstacle courses, and respond to mechanical voice commands. Mistakes were corrected with calibrated shocks. Success was rewarded with dry kibble pellets. Feldman noted Buddy's confusion, not disobedience, just fear, and requested a lower voltage threshold. Her suggestion was logged but ignored. Later that week, the dogs were allowed into a shared courtyard one at a time, at first, then in pairs. Max and Buddy were paired together. The yard was a concrete square bordered by high fencing with only a shallow trough of water in the corner. Buddy trotted slowly, still limping slightly from the implant site on his shoulder. Max approached, his body language cautious but non-threatening. They sniffed each other, circled, then sat in a quiet truce. That afternoon, a test drone buzzed overhead. It dropped a small parcel on the ground near Buddy. When he sniffed it, the object released a loud popping noise. Buddy yelped and retreated. Max stepped in front of him, his stance rigid protective. For a moment, the two handlers watching from the observation booth leaned forward. One murmured, "Looks like the old instincts are still in there." Max and Buddy grew closer over the following days. During meals, Max would nudge a portion of his own toward Buddy if the younger dog seemed hesitant. At night, when the lights dimmed, Max would press his back against the side of Buddy's cage as close as the metal walls allowed. Buddy no longer flinched when they touched. One morning, a new dog was introduced into the yard, Zeus. A Doberman, sleek and muscular, with cropped ears and a sharp gaze. Zeus was a prototype of aggression conditioning a failed experiment. He was unpredictable, easily triggered, and wore a reinforced collar. He lunged at Buddy on sight. Max leapt between them instantly, teeth bared, growling with a force that froze Zeus mid-step. The moment was tense electric. The handler observing above activated Zeus's collar, and the Doberman collapsed twitching before being removed. Feldman later noted Max is showing attachment behaviors, protective instinct stronger than baseline. Recommend paired missions. But something else was happening. Something none of the scientists had calculated for. The bond between Buddy and Max wasn't a fluke. It was transforming both of them. Buddy, once terrified, now followed Max's lead, learning from him. And Max, dulled by grief and trauma, had begun to rediscover purpose. Meanwhile, in the employee barracks outside the lab wing, Feldman sat alone one night, sipping lukewarm coffee. She stared at a photo on her tablet. Her daughter, Ava, age 10, in a school play costume. Ava lived with Feldman's sister in Ohio. After her husband's death 3 years earlier, Feldman had taken this position out of desperation. Her hands trembled as she looked at the dog's progress logs. She whispered, "Just one more year." Inside the facility, Max nudged Buddy gently, guiding him to a spot in the yard that caught the warmest strip of light from the artificial lamps above. The two sat there pressed shoulder to shoulder. In the coldest part of the world, warmth had begun to bloom again, not from the systems or the scientists, but between two living hearts beating in sync. Chapter 3. The Escape Plan. Facility Delta was a labyrinth, a web of reinforced corridors, surveillance drones, sealed doors, and biometric checkpoints. But even the most tightly wound systems held small cracks. And sometimes cracks grow. It started with a power outage. A sandstorm swept through the New Mexico desert late one evening, disrupting external solar arrays. For 13 minutes, the backup generators kicked in at half capacity. Lights flickered. Cameras rebooted. And in that sliver of chaos, Max noticed something. The outer gate system reset in a staggered sequence gate. 3 always reactivated 3 seconds after Gate 2. It was a detail only a creature like Max would spot. And now it burned into his mind like a blueprint. He began to test things. During training drills, he lingered near gates, watched security routines, observed Carter and the other handlers, even counted steps during patrol rotations. Buddy followed him, still nervous but increasingly sharp. He had begun to mirror Max's instincts. A month into their growing bond, the idea of escape shifted from fantasy to a tangible possibility. That same week, a new janitor joined Facility Delta's support staff. His name was Carlos Alvarez, 29, thin and wiry, with calloused hands and eyes that darted like a nervous sparrow. Originally from El Paso, Carlos had served 2 years in prison for petty theft before being recruited into a contractor program that fed manpower into private facilities. He was quiet, kept his head down, and wore his ID badge religiously, but he noticed things like the way Max watched everything, or how Buddy never barked. Carlos had always loved dogs. As a child, he had rescued strays behind his abuela's house. At night, while mopping bloodless hallways, he began leaving tiny meat scraps near Max's cage. At first, Max ignored him. Then slowly, he began to sit near the bars when Carlos approached. One night, Carlos whispered, "I don't know what they did to you, but you're smarter than they think." Max blinked. Carlos reached a hand through the bars, and Max didn't bite. That silent trust would become the final piece of the plan. Meanwhile, Dr. Feldman had grown increasingly unsettled. Her requests for lower voltage methods had been denied again. The project had entered Phase 2 pair bonding and field obedience. Feldman watched Buddy and Max with a mixture of awe and guilt. They exceeded every cognitive benchmark. But that wasn't a victory, it was a warning. She requested a private review with Clark. "I think we're pushing them too far," she said, arms crossed. Her brow furrowed tension, lining her jaw. "They're forming connections, social-emotional. We're weaponizing that. You know what happens when you sharpen something built to feel." Clark didn't even look up from his tablet. "What happens is control. And success." Feldman left his office with a leaden heart. That night she unlocked her personal tablet and copied encrypted footage of the training sessions onto an external drive. She'd decided this would be her final month. 3 nights later, a test session went wrong. The handlers activated a new AI target dummy that malfunctioned, emitting a high-frequency pitch that sent Buddy into a panic. He barked wildly, disoriented, running in circles. Max lunged forward, breaking formation, and tried to guide him away. The handlers punished them both. Electric pulses ran through their collars. Max growled. Buddy cried. Feldman banged on the glass, but was ignored. Afterward, in the medical bay, Max refused to eat. Buddy curled beside him, muzzle pressed into his side. Feldman watched the surveillance feed in silence. That was the last straw. That same evening, Max and Buddy met again in the courtyard. Carlos appeared later emptying trash bins. He knelt beside the fence. Under his sleeve was a key card. He leaned in, whispering, "Tomorrow." 0200, back corridor next to maintenance tunnel. I'll override door 2 and 3. After that, you're on your own. Max didn't move, but his eyes locked with Carlos's. He understood. That night, the desert sky raged again. Winds howled over the facility. Inside protocols were strained teams thinned due to external access road damage. At 1:58 a.m., Carlos swiped the door. Max and Buddy slipped from their cages unlocked via Carlos's manual override. Cameras in that section looped on static frames thanks to a corrupted feed Carlos had accidentally triggered. The maintenance tunnel was long, metallic, dimly lit. Pipes lined the ceiling. Max led ears, pinned muscles tense. Buddy followed, shaking but quiet. At door 3, Carlos stood waiting. He wore an old hoodie and civilian jeans. His eyes were wild. "I shouldn't be doing this," he said. "But you don't deserve this." He pressed a code. The door opened. The night air hit them like a wave, cool, dusty free. Carlos shoved a wrapped package toward Max. Inside were protein bars, a tiny vial of antibiotics, and a soft cloth with a child's scent on it. "That was my dog's. You'll need to stay hidden. Stay alive." Then he ran. Alarms blared moments later. Lights snapped on across the compound. From her quarters, Feldman sat upright, heart racing. She knew. She didn't call security. She closed her tablet, got dressed, and quietly deleted the surveillance backup. Outside, Max and Buddy ran into the dark. For the first time in months, their feet met earth. For the first time in months, they were free. Chapter 4. The Fateful Encounter. By dawn, Max and Buddy had traveled nearly 10 miles across the high desert. The terrain was harsh, jagged rocks, dry gulches, wind-blown brush, but they pressed forward. Max led with precision, navigating by instinct. Buddy followed close, growing steadier with each stride. Both were dehydrated, limping their pads raw from running across terrain not meant for pause. They reached a 2-lane highway just as the sun broke the horizon in a line of molten gold. A rusted sign on the roadside read, "Welcome to Valencia County." Cars were rare this early. The dogs huddled in the shade of a culvert waiting. Their luck came in the form of a beat-up green Subaru. It creaked to a halt, hazard lights, blinking dust trailing behind. The driver stepped out cautious. Emily Rivera, 31, had the kind of presence that made animals look twice. Tall, lean, and dressed in hiking boots and cargo pants, she kept her wavy auburn hair tucked beneath a baseball cap. Her tan skin was sun-kissed from years in the field, and a faded paw print tattoo peeked out from her sleeve. Emily was a veterinarian, with a trauma specialty recently moved from Santa Fe after a bitter breakup and a job burnout. She had come to the countryside to rebuild not just her clinic, but herself. When she saw the two dogs, one alert scarred, shielding the other, her professional instincts overrode caution. "Hey there," she said, softly squatting down, keeping her hands visible. Max stared, unmoving. Buddy whimpered faintly and stepped forward, then collapsed from exhaustion. "Oh, no. Okay. Okay." Emily moved quickly, gently, loading them into the back of her Subaru, wrapping Buddy in a blanket. She didn't miss the military-grade implant scar under Max's collar line. Her eyes darkened, but she said nothing. She drove them to her clinic, Rivera Animal Recovery, housed in a converted firehouse near the edge of town. The interior smelled of cedar and rubbing alcohol. She settled Buddy on a padded recovery table and sedated him lightly to treat his abrasions. Max stayed by the door the entire time, rigid but watching. Her assistant, Jonah Myers, arrived shortly after. In his 20s, short and freckled, Jonah was an energetic vet tech who had once dreamed of joining Doctors Without Borders, but stayed behind to care for his aging mother. He raised an eyebrow when he saw the dogs. "Strays?" he asked. Maybe Emily said, or maybe survivors. She scanned Max's chip, but the result came up scrambled encrypted military code. She didn't push further. "Get them water and soft food. I'll handle the rest." Over the next 3 days, Max and Buddy remained under care. Max wouldn't eat until he saw Buddy chew first. Emily gave them space, observing quietly. She noticed something remarkable, their nonverbal communication, the way Max repositioned himself to block open doors, or how Buddy calmed when Max was near. Trauma, she knew, could either destroy or bond. On the 4th day, Buddy wagged his tail faintly when Emily entered. She smiled. "You're a sweetheart under all that dust, huh?" That evening, her clinic door creaked open again. Jake Turner, 38, stood there. A former Marine sniper, Jake bore the hallmarks of a man trying to disappear. Hooded eyes, a weak stubble, and shoulders that sloped as though he carried an invisible pack. He lived on the outskirts of town off-grid where he raised chickens and drank too much coffee. PTSD had chased him out of the city and into silence. Emily had met him once before when he brought in a stray cat with a broken paw. He hadn't said much then. Now he stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on Max. Emily raised a brow. "You all right?" Jake stepped forward slowly. "That shepherd, where'd he come from highway south of here?" Why, Jake knelt beside Max, his hand trembling slightly. "He's military. You can see it. Not the body language of a pet." Max didn't flinch. He sniffed Jake's hand once, then rested his head against it. That simple act opened something in Jake, a space he hadn't let anyone into in years. Emily studied him. "You recognize him?" "No," Jake said, "but I recognize the look in his eyes." Jake began visiting the clinic daily. At first he sat quietly, just being near Max and Buddy. Eventually he helped clean cages, then mend fences. Emily watched this unfold with cautious hope. One evening, as they shared coffee outside, she said, "They've been through something bad. You can see it in their gait." Jake nodded. "So have I." Buddy curled at their feet. Max lay with his chin on his paws, ears flicking at every breeze. That night, under the moonlight that spilled across Emily's back porch, a man, a woman, and 2 dogs sat in companionable silence, each carrying wounds, but no longer entirely alone. Chapter 5. Recovery and New Beginnings. Autumn came slowly to Valencia County. The days shortened, and the wind carried a chill that crept in overnight. At Rivera Animal Recovery, the leaves outside turned amber and rust. Inside, something else was changing too. Buddy had gained weight. His coat, once matted and dull, had returned to its golden sheen. He now trotted confidently down the corridor, tail wagging, tongue lolling. Max, meanwhile, was sharper than ever alert, but calmer, no longer pacing constantly, his eyes steadier. The scars across his flank and left paw were now just part of his story, no longer defining him. Jake had begun helping Emily regularly, though he still avoided town. He wore the same pair of jeans and worn brown jacket most days. His black boots scuffed the tile floor as he moved quietly between duties, changing water bowls, cleaning wounds, logging meds. But his hands, once tremulous, were steadier now. Emily noticed. She also noticed how Jake spoke more when Max was nearby. Max had become an anchor, Buddy the light. The dogs were catalysts for Jake's quiet resurrection. One afternoon, Emily introduced a new figure to the clinic, Dr. Nora Kaplan, a psychologist specializing in canine PTSD and behavior therapy. In her early 50s, Dr. Kaplan had kind gray eyes behind square glasses and a silver braid draped over one shoulder. She walked with a slight limp, a relic of a childhood accident, and carried a calm, deliberate energy. Dogs who survive what these two have, she said as she reviewed their files, need structured social integration. But they also need purpose. She observed Max and Buddy through one-way glass while Jake led them through a simple command circuit. Max obeyed immediately. Buddy hesitated on the final command down, but followed Max's lead a second later. Kaplan smiled. "They're ready." Jake raised an eyebrow. Ready for what Emily answered, to help others. Inspired by Dr. Kaplan's suggestion, Emily and Jake launched a pilot program, Warrior Paws, pairing rescued dogs with veterans recovering from trauma. The clinic hosted the first sessions every Thursday afternoon. At first it was just Jake and a few ex-service friends. Elena Hart, a Navy medic with a prosthetic leg and a sharp tongue. Darren Brooks, a soft-spoken former helicopter mechanic who hadn't held a dog since his brother's funeral. The dogs, led by Max and Buddy, helped break the silence. One Thursday, a new participant arrived, Mason Lee, 27, a recently discharged Army translator who spoke little and wore headphones constantly. Tall and wiry Mason had deep-set eyes and a quiet, analytical gaze. He kept his arms crossed, sleeves rolled tight. When Buddy approached him gently, he froze. "He won't hurt you," Emily said softly. Mason knelt. Buddy rested his head on Mason's knee. The tension in Mason's body melted just slightly, but enough to make everyone in the room hold their breath. In the weeks that followed, Warrior Paws became a community. Jonah built agility courses in the yard. Jake crafted handmade collars and leashes from leather scraps. Emily secured small grants. Max and Buddy became unofficial mascots. Meanwhile, Carlos Alvarez, who had not been seen since the night of the escape, resurfaced in Albuquerque under a different name. Emily received an unmarked envelope one morning. Inside was a note. They made it. That's all that matters. See. She tucked the note in a drawer. She never told Jake. The seasons turned again. Snow dusted the red roofs of Valencia in December. Emily hosted a holiday gathering at the clinic complete with a tiny tree and mismatched string lights. Jake brought warm cider. Max wore a knit scarf that made Buddy bark in laughter. Late that night, after the guests had gone, Emily and Jake stood outside under the stars. "You thinking of going back to the world?" she asked gently. Jake didn't answer immediately. He looked at Max, then Buddy, then at Emily. "I think I already did." She smiled. Inside, Max lay by the fire. Buddy curled beside him. In a world that once broke them, they had found each other and helped mend the ones who needed them most. In life, every soul, human or animal, carries its own wounds, its untold story. But something beautiful happens when broken hearts find each other. Healing begins. Max and Buddy didn't just survive. They helped others around them remember how to live, how to trust, and how to love again. Like Jake, Emily, and the veterans in this journey, sometimes what we need isn't grand advice but a quiet presence beside us. Loyalty, connection, and kindness can spark light in the darkest places. If you believe that even small acts, a dog's gentle eyes, a hand reaching out, a silent moment shared, can make a real difference in someone's life, share this story. Let it remind others that healing is possible and no one is truly alone. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and if this story moved you, type Amen as a blessing for those who are hurting, for those finding their way back, and for anyone who needs to be reminded that hope is real. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories. May God bless all of you who watched, shared, and believe that goodness still exists in this world.